Hey guys, this is Professor Phil Pinzoni. I'm out here in a mixed deciduous forest, about 20 minutes outside of Letchworth, and for about 30 minutes I've been looking around, seeing if I could find some different examples of forest structure that are related to this lecture 10, the third part of forest canopy structure. So I have found some examples I'm going to use, and this is how it's going to go for the rest of the semester. It's going to be a lot of voiceover PowerPoints, and I'm going to go out every week trying to locate different ecosystems and see if I could find relatable examples while I'm hiking around in different parts of New York. Again, we're in a mixed deciduous forest here. I'm with my crazy dogs. This is Stella here. Rocco's looks like he's licking some deer poop. But yeah, so this is how it's gonna go, really. I'm excited to be out here and share what I find with you guys. So right here, found a pretty good example of some different wood types. As you can see here, you have these two different shades within this old stump that was logged, and it is really a good example of heartwood versus sapwood. These are two terms that we should know. The heartwood, as its name suggests, is the older inner part of the tree. And this tissue, obviously all the tissue now is dead, but even while this tree was alive, this heartwood here is made up of dead tissue. Now the outer part is the sapwood. That is the viable tissue. That is the tissue made up of cells that the plant actually needs to allocate resources towards. Now, the heartwood is chock full of different compounds. This chemical group called tyloses, and as well as resins and dyes to make different fungi and bacteria to make it harder for them to decompose this heartwood. Now the plant actually doesn't really need the heartwood. Now there are several examples of trees that are just living their normal life that actually have this hollow structure without this heartwood. Obviously, structurally, they're not as sound. So in an open habitat, when there's higher winds, trees that have their heartwoods removed by bacteria and fungi, they're more susceptible to toppling over. However, in a more closed system, right, these trees can be hollow and they could live for centuries. But this is a pretty unique example because we have these substances, these resins, these dyes, these tyloses that the plant allocates to this heartwood that's supposed to reduce fungal decomposition. But actually what we're looking at here, this stark difference in color, is actually decomposition due to fungi. And if you look closely, you can see these dark margins, and that's actually the margin between two individuals of saprotrophic fungi that are breaking down this heartwood. So there are specialists, fungal specialists, that specialize in decomposing heartwood. Now the sapwood is this other color. It too obviously over time will decompose, but it looks as if this heartwood was already encountering fungi that was decomposing it, you could see this clearly different color within this heartwood. So again, trees don't need their heartwood. It's already dead tissue, but they do need that sapwood, right? We see that lateral meristem that does allow the conductive properties needed to carry out photosynthesis. So in focus, hopefully, is this young spruce tree, and I'm going to use this young spruce tree as an example, talking about the photosynthetic allocation. So we all know most plants, they photosynthesize. There are some plants that I will talk about in the future that are parasitic, and they steal sugars from other organisms. But here we have this young spruce, and I'm going to use it as an example to talk about the hierarchy of the allocation of photosynthates. A little spider nest. The first on the list is cellular respiration, right? Like you and I, plants have living cells that need to be supplied with products so they can carry out their own respiration, right? If plants can't provide their own cells with energy to carry out their own processes, the plant is going to die, right? Like you and I, plants allocate energy towards cellular respiration. If it can't do that, the plant's dead. The second on the list is for photosynthetes to be allocated to the production of new leaf material and new root material. This makes sense, right? This is number 2 because without new leaf material, there's going to be no photosynthesis to support itself. Without root material, those plants can't allocate or get soil resources needed for this photosynthesis. So number 2, again, needle and root production, that's key, right? Because without it, the plant won't be able to keep up its metabolic demands, right? Number 3 is flower and seed production, right? Reproduction, when everything's great, when there's enough roots and leaves, when the cells are being supplied with enough products. Next on the list is to enhance sexual reproduction, right? This will allow its genes, right? This young little spruce, it'll hopefully spread its genes on to the next generation. So that's number 3. Number 4 is primary growth, right? When all of those first 3 things are supplemented with enough photosynthate, then it'll allocate these resources towards primary growth, right? It'll get taller, right? And this is again enhances its ability to compete in these forests, right? So it grows tall, right? So last on the list is this secondary growth, right? After the plant supplies its cells with enough products so they can cellular respirate, after leaves and root material is created so it can continue supplying and overreaching its just base demand of photosynthetes, after products are allocated towards sexual reproduction, after you get an elongation of the central stem and the tree becomes taller, the final thing is the secondary growth, right? The trees eventually will get wider. Now, because this is the last on the list, that's why dendrochronology is what it is, right? If it was first on the list, you wouldn't have variation year to year. But because it's last on the list, when things aren't so great, you have a smaller ring that year, right? Because it's last on the list, right? Does that make sense to you guys? I can't really hear you because this is a video. Hopefully that makes sense. So I just went over the hierarchy of the allocation of photosynthetes, but it's also important to know that the habitat that the plants are growing from drives much of this allocation. Depending on
if the habitat is of high quality, meaning that there is enough sunlight and there's good nutrient availability and enough water, those high quality habitats are going to allow plants to photosynthesize much more than a plant living in a low quality habitat. So, in a high quality habitat, only 25% of their total photosynthate goes to maintenance. In these conditions, those plants they're gonna have much more reproductive effort. They're gonna have greater stem elongation. They're gonna have really thick tree rings. They're gonna have a lot of secondary growth. Compared to that, a plant living in one of those low quality habitat might need 75% of its photosynthase for maintenance, just leaving 25% left for all these other things, right? So clearly, an individual that is stressed in a nutrient poor, light limited, and water limited habitat is not going to have a thick ring. So, yes, habitat does drive many of these interactions. The topic of this lecture is sudden crown reduction. So, a individual tree can have its crown greatly reduced by the following reasons. First, you're going to have a natural cause, such as herbivory, pathogens, and parasites consuming or removing photosynthetic structures on plants. And then you have human disturbances. For example, a forester is going to remove different branches in the individuals within his or her stand to allow more light in to increase primary productivity, right? So we have natural and then we have human reductions in crown size. Now, if 50% or more of an individual plant's leaves are suddenly removed, usually the plant ends up dying. Photosynthesis can no longer support the living tissue because remember, even if many of the branches are removed, there's a ridiculous amount of living cells in the cambium, that lateral meristem, the outermost ring of these individual trees. So think about all that surface area surrounding the central stem. There's a ton of cells that require photosynthase. If the plant can no longer maintain the cellular respiration of these cells, then that plant is going to die. Now, if you take a look at the figure on the right-hand side, you have this plant all the way to the right, this black and white plant, and let's just say most of its canopy is removed. The only way this plant will continue to live is if it can quickly abandon much of its cambium tissue. So if it abandons or kills off many of its branches that are no longer supporting leaves, then there is a slight chance that it has enough reserves, it has enough carbon stored throughout its body to support cellular respiration in this ridiculous time of disturbance. Now, obviously, a plant that is going through this will not put on a thick ring at all. So, dendrochronologists, they utilize this information to build these ecological stories of past disturbances. So in a previous lecture, we talked about coppicing and pollarding. Now, if you can recall, coppicing and pollarding is a method early humans realized that they can manipulate the growth of a plant so that plant produces these long, flexible shoots that can be used for tool making, right? They can be woven into materials. They can be grown for fence-like materials, for arrows, and by coppicing and pollarding a plant, you are creating a bunch of these straight, flexible strands of plant material. Much easier to work with than irregular branches of different, more mature trees. So you might be wondering, how do these pollarded or coppiced individual plants survive? If you remember, all of their photosynthetic tissue is removed. That means that there is no energy coming in to support cellular respiration. Well, something that we might not have touched on, I just kind of introduced coppicing and pollarding, is that when humans do this to plants, they actually remove these above ground tissues in the winter. Now, in the winter, the plant enters this dormancy, and there just isn't a lot of cellular respiration. From number one, plants just generally, especially at this latitude, they just slow down, right? Number two, the actual temperature slows down cellular respiration. Additionally, coppicing and pollarding a plant occurs in young plants. So you actually select young plants to do this to. Now, younger plants, if you think about it, they already have a smaller diameter. What that means in the term of energetics and respiration, it means that there's fewer cells that require photosynthase. So their energy demand is actually lower. Young plants, although they might be fragile, right? They actually don't have a lot of energy demands compared to a more mature tree. So we have both this utilizing this winter season, this dormancy, and that younger plants are selected that have less requirements for their cellular respiration. So the next thing we're going to have to learn about is tree growth efficiency, commonly abbreviated as TGE. So tree growth efficiency is the volume of wood per year per area. Foresters, they want to maximize this tree growth efficiency usually. Sometimes, however, depending on the products that they're aiming to supply, like if they're trying to create a stand of really tall trees for like large support beams, they're not going to want to maximize tree growth efficiency. They're going to want to maximize tree height. So tree height is not analogous to tree growth efficiency. If you are in the paper industry or the wood chip industry, you don't care how tall your trees are. You're trying to maximize that growth efficiency to get as much wood as you can out of that area. So again, depending on what your aim is, you're going to interact with your stands accordingly. So a common theme that we've been learning about is the difference in growth patterns with strongly apical controlled trees and weakly apical controlled trees. So a stand of strongly apical controlled trees, like a stand of pines or any conifer for that matter, you're going to have different interactions with the growth patterns of those apically controlled trees. When these stands are widely spaced, you're going to get a lot of efficiency in strongly apical controlled trees because, as you can see in this picture to the right, the branches, this triangular shape, is actually really efficient because the tree produces these wide horizontal branches. A lot of those branches are gaining a lot of light, and these plants can rapidly photosynthesize. They grow really fast when they are widely spaced. Now, we should remember that the canopy of the active canopy of these individuals that are apically controlled, strongly apically controlled, the canopy is actually going to stay the same If the stand is not reduced while they grow, if the density is not changed as they're growing, that active canopy is going to remain the same size. So photosynthetes are produced pretty much at the same rate throughout their life, right? So with that being said, the gross photosynthetes remain pretty much the same throughout their lives because that active canopy remains the same size, but net photosynthesis actually decreases because there's more tissues that need to be provided with photosynthetes. Oppositely, when we look at weakly apical controlled trees, when they're spaced wide, they're not efficient in the least. So they actually are more efficient when they are narrowly spaced. When they're wide, you get these branches, and you get obviously these weakly apically controlled trees. They're going to branch a lot more. Those branches are going to reach towards the upper parts of the canopy so they can actually interact with light more and become those leading stems. So this is not efficient because these branches and these trees produce much more branches where there is available light. Those actual branches, they have a lot of tissue, a lot of live tissue that needs to be supplied with a lot of photosynthetes, right? And think about it. Think about all this self-shading, especially in the upper canopy of these apically weakly controlled trees. Now, when they're grown in a high density, this weakly apical controlled tree with these branches, these several branches that are self-shading itself, the individual actually takes on more of an X current shape when it's narrowly spaced. So when it's narrowly spaced, you're not going to have a lot of branches. You're going to have a tighter canopy. That canopy isn't going to have a lot of branches that require a lot of photosynthetes. So narrowly spaced trees, weakly apically controlled species, are going to be more efficient. Again, this is opposite to strongly apically controlled trees, because when strongly apical controlled trees are widely spaced, you get the highest efficiency, right? So again, stark differences in the type of species growing in these stands. I feel like we have the basics down with these growth patterns in the relation to tree growth efficiency, but we need to take this to the next step and understand how age is also interacting with tree growth efficiency. So for both species types, both strongly and weakly apically controlled species, you are going to have a higher tree growth efficiency when they are narrowly spaced when they are young. This makes a lot of sense because young trees, they don't have a lot of tissues that need to be continuously supported by photosynthetes, right? So even if they don't have a lot of leaf area, their metabolic demands are much lower. And when you have narrowly spaced trees, you're going to have a ton more efficiency in that area because there's so much wood growing because you have all these different individuals. Those individuals, again, don't have a lot of metabolic requirements. So again, both types of species are going to have higher tree growth efficiency when they're planted in narrow stands when they are young. When they are older, strongly apically controlled trees are going to be more efficient when they are widely spaced because, again, they can reach out their branches and absorb more and more light. Now, this efficiency goes down with weakly apically controlled trees when they are narrowly spaced as these stands mature because you get competition, you get less soil resources, less light, and eventually, even though these branches of these weakly apically controlled trees have a lot of metabolic demands. They reach an age where they spread enough so that they can actually take in a lot of sunlight and photosynthesize. And when they're widely spaced, they're going to have more of those soil resources to themselves. So again, this is a very complex idea. You guys know forest ecology. It can't be summed up in one sentence, and we have to look at all these interactions. Foresters know this. As one of their stands is reaching maturity, they go ahead and they thin their stand. Now, thinning their stand obviously is going to allow more light in, and it's going to allow those individuals to absorb more soil nutrients. So they know this, right? They're manipulating this. They get the most out of their land by planting both apically controlled and weakly apically controlled trees narrowly in their plots of land that they have. They get a ton of tree growth efficiency early on. As these stands mature, they go ahead and they knock back and they remove individuals to make the spacing wider. So again, these foresters, they know what they're doing. They know how to get the most tree growth efficiency out of their land. Tree stem stability is something that is strongly correlated with the type of organism growing as well as its habitat type. So on the top right picture, you guys see this photograph of this tree that literally looks like it's split down the middle, right? This individual is a weakly apically controlled tree. It has all these branches. Those branches, wide-ranging branches, have weighed down the tree. And you will notice that this is, again, a open habitat. So in an open habitat, there's going to be more wind, and especially with a individual with a decurrent form, wind is going to decrease that stem stability. We should also know the habitat quality. If it's a really good habitat, if there's a lot of nutrients, a lot of water, and a lot of light, you can have individuals that have less stability. Now that is contrary to what many of us think of. We think that if there's going to be a habitat that supports a lot of growth, that there will be individuals that have a stable stem, but that's not actually true. In habitats where there is a lot of nutrients and there's a high density of trees, those individual trees, they will actually grow tall quickly. Again, being in a densely populated stand, the goal is to produce that primary growth so they can reach above the canopy to access light. When this happens, you get these tall, skinny trees. Tall, skinny trees are obviously not going to be that stable. Nutrients is not related to stem stability, right? I think that's an interesting idea. Contrary to an individual living in an open habitat, in one of these densely populated stands, there's going to be less of a wind interaction. This stand of tree, they actually can support each other because their roots are going to be intertwined. Sometimes their crowns will be leaning on each other. So their strength, their stability is increased in numbers. If foresters thin the forest too rapidly, if too many trees are removed from a forest at one time, there will be a loss of this root entwinement and crown support, and you're going to see more trees being broken and being pushed over by high winds like this picture in the right.
So, whoa. We talk about how temperature and also how available water is changed when you remove a lot of trees through logging. Rocco, get out of there. Rocco, get. But also, we have this wind interaction, right? And this is a great example of when you remove a lot of trees from an area, there's going to be less of a boundary layer, and there's going to be faster wind moving through that area. This is a great example of that. So this tree was not logged, it snapped because there's a lot of wind, right? Much of this area was logged, and because of that, there's obviously going to be faster winds, and there's going to be more susceptibility to literally snapping, right? This is not human. This is not a human direct disturbance, right? This is from wind. We also have these nice saprotrophic fungi growing. So yeah.
Next on the agenda is release from side shade. So after a disturbance, after natural or human disturbance, after humans might remove several individuals, a plant is going to have been released from side shade. A plant not affected from that disturbance is going to have all this available light that was once being shaded from their neighbor that has been removed. Now, this doesn't just change the light environment. This is going to change the soil temperature. More light interacting and touching the ground is going to increase temperature. This increase of temperature is going to actually increase the metabolism of soil bacteria and soil fungi. So these fungi and bacteria, they have higher metabolism in warmer temperatures. They're going to break down more organic compounds. There's going to be more available nutrients. There's going to be more available carbon. Soil temperature, it's not just temperature. It actually increases these microbes, the metabolism of these microbes. Moisture is going to be more available. With less trees soaking up this soil moisture through their transpiration, there's going to be actually a larger pool of water on the forest floor. So there are pictures, if you Google deforestation in the Amazon, if you look at those pictures, most of them you see water actually pooling on the barren forest floor. No longer are there individuals soaking up water, and you get this large influx of water to this area. Now this too will interact with the biota, the microbes living in the soil. Many of these bacteria and fungi, they are aerobic. They require oxygen, and when there is a layer of water over that soil surface, there's going to be less available oxygen. You're going to get different fungi and bacteria living there. And many times, I feel like this is one of the main reasons why it's hard for a plot of land to bounce back after a large disturbance, because you're changing everything from these microbes up just by changing the moisture content and obviously the temperature. The air around these areas is going to be drier. There's less moisture transpiring through the stomata of these leaves, so the air is actually going to be drier as well. So again, the soil becomes moister. In terms of soil moisture, depending on the actual habitat, you can have totally different responses. So in a habitat that was pretty dry and water limited, release from side shade will reduce the amount of individuals, and there will be more available water for those plants that didn't die from that disturbance or weren't removed from that disturbance. So those individuals are going to have more available water, and they're going to grow rapidly. However, if there is release from side shade in a already moist habitat, then like I mentioned before, a lot of that water is going to pool. There's not going to be oxygen available to those roots. Without oxygen, the cells in the roots can't carry out respiration and tap into their carbon stores, and they are going to die. So water isn't just going to pool when you remove trees. It depends on how how the habitat was, how high the water table was, how much available water there was, how much precipitation there was. So all these are clearly going to be interacting.
So this white pine on the right here, it has been released from side shade, and you could see that because you have just branches, these lateral branches showing up on only one side of the tree. In this case, from where we're positioned on the left side of this tree, you have these side branches. So you can see that we're actually on private land, and to the left is actually a path that was cleared. Because of that, there's obviously more light coming in from this left-hand side, and you could see this individual being released from this shade that once was. Now, obviously, older lateral branches are going to be lower on the tree, and with this, you can actually see that initially the length of those lateral branches is actually quite wide, showing that as soon as this individual was released from shade, you actually have rapid primary growth. Right? Now, as you move your eyes up this tree, those lateral branches, they get shorter, which is a remnant of self-shading. But I like that you can see early on this rapid primary growth.
We already talked about how release from side shade increases the amount of wind that individual will experience, but we didn't talk about how it interacts with the shape of the tree. So many times when there is more wind, when an individual is growing in a very windy environment, you'll see this spiral of this central stem. Now this spiral, it distributes the force of that wind, and it allows that individual to actually still maintain some structural integrity. So on the right hand picture, you see two individuals. This outermost individual interacts with wind more so, and you can see this spiral grain of the wood. Now, if wind is coming from one direction, we can actually see the different reaction wood when we look at these tree rings. So again, in an ash tree, this is an angiosperm. It's a deciduous tree, not a conifer. And we already learned that deciduous trees, they have tension wood. So this ash individual was grown in a windy environment, and you're going to have the tension wood that is going to be upwind, right? A needle-leafed organism has compression wood. Again, this is review from last lecture series. So oppositely, a needle individual is going to put its compression wood on the downwind side, while the broadleaf tree is going to put its tension wood on the upwind side. Another interaction we're going to learn about is this idea of sun scalding. Now, sun scald, it occurs in trees that have been released from side shade, and in the winter, especially in latitudes that we live in, and even more north from here. These areas, with individuals that have been released from side shade on a really sunny, really cold day, all that sunlight hitting one side of the tree, right, the southern side of the tree, that side of the tree is going to warm up because of all that new sunlight. And when that occurs, sometimes parts of the meristem actually become active again because of that increase in temperature. When that sun goes away in these really cold days, you get the expansion of those water molecules as they freeze, and you get a killing of the tissues that have been activated. So where the part of the lateral meristem died, either a small crack or a large scar will form, and there will be no new wood growing there. In terms of canopy form changes, depending on when the individual is released from shade, there will obviously be a different growth pattern. So if the individual is young and a small individual, when it's released from shade, like this green circle, then these individuals will grow much more rapidly with all this new available light. These individuals, most likely because they are young, because they are being shaded, most of their leaves and their leaf tissue is going to be those shade leaves. So all of a sudden they'll need to actually create some sun leaves that are that have defenses to withstand all this new radiation. But if they can change their type of leaf they put out, then they will be fine and they will actually grow rather rapidly. Now, if the individual is older and taller, when it is released from shade, it will its crown will elongate, and you'll get these water sprouts form in the canopy and below the canopy. And a lot of times you get individuals that are released later on in their life, they actually become top heavy. So it's these individuals that are susceptible to having a lot of dieback because they're not structurally sound. So we learn about the allocation of different photosynthates. With a more mature, taller individual being released from shade, their secondary growth is going to be allocated more towards the canopy so that the taller portions of the tree can support all these new stems that have to be created. Again, this makes it much more top heavy, and this allows this is a main reason why many of these trees, once they're released from shade as they're more mature, are susceptible to damage. So again, first secondary growth occurs up in the canopy, and then you get this secondary growth radiating down towards the forest floor, where the individual is then more supported. So both strongly apical controlled trees and weakly apically controlled trees, they're both going to have a flattened shape to their canopy when grown in high shade. These understory trees that have been growing in heavily shaded areas are having this prolonged juvenile phase. Now, once they're released from shade, they're going to grow rapidly. We know this. Many times I've encountered seedlings that have germinated on old stumps and old logs. Now, if they are released from shade, they're going to rapidly grow, and individuals growing from dead stumps and logs, they're going to be structurally compromised. They're growing fast, remember that. Their primary growth, their secondary growth, they have all this sunlight available to them. They're going to grow fast, and they're going to be more readily topple over if they germinate on one of these old decaying stumps or logs. Sometimes you see this especially with logging, when it's living in a deeply shaded area and all of a sudden there's just 100% light. Many times we see shock death occur. The plant cannot quickly turn over its shade leaves into sun leaves, and those shade leaves, they are vulnerable to damage, right? There's not a they're definitely thinner, right? They don't have many defenses against all this incoming radiation, so we have this shock death occur. Some species, they can quickly turn over their shade leaves into more light leaves, and they um, can grow vigorously once they're released from high shade. Now, this is visible in trees with strong apical control, and I mentioned this earlier in this lecture with one of those videos. That you can actually see the distance of the branching in strong apically controlled trees. When it's released from shade, you get a larger distance between those branches. Individuals that are that have weak apical control, when they're released from shade, you can actually see leading shoots are going to extend rapidly. And you can actually see from this picture on the bottom that once that individual is released from high shade, you get this totally different growth pattern. The last portion of today's lecture is looking into the applications to management. Now, in most cases, unfortunately, we have industrial forestry often involves clear cutting. Now, many times, as I talked about earlier in this lecture, when you clear cut, you totally change every part of the ecosystem from the bottom up, right? From the microbial level all the way up to the plant level. You're changing that system to a point where it's probably not going to become a forest in any time soon. So this actually is remnant of pre-forestry. We learned this in the first week of classes. We learned about how our early ancestors, as we grew in population, as we needed more requirements, timber requirements, we would go into forests, we would clear cut, and then there would be no forests. Those forests wouldn't bounce back, and guess what? We would just move to another area. That is pre-forestry, right? In a sustainable practice, you go in an area and you take trees, you take certain individuals, maybe you only take the oldest individuals, maybe you only take a few species, but that forest will regenerate. In non-sustainable clear cutting practices, this is remnant of pre-forestry. You literally have to pick up and move to another area, right? So this concludes our lecture today. I just wanted to thank you guys for your attention and let you know that this is how it's going to go. I'm going to try my best getting these videos out before our regular class time. Obviously, this didn't work out today. I think I'm an hour late. There's definitely a learning curve with editing these videos. But again, I'm going to try to get 2 videos out a week. They might not be every Tuesday and Thursday, but I'll definitely get at least 2 videos out a week. I just wanted to thank you guys, wish you guys good health, and to make sure that you are keeping up with these readings. More than ever, you need to educate yourself, right? I can only do so much, especially behind a screen and behind a camera. You guys have to actively learn. You guys have to read all the readings throughout the semester now. You have to be on my level because, I'm trying my hardest here, and you guys have to step up because we're rolling with this semester. So again, good luck. Thanks for your attention, and I will be, talking to you guys very shortly.